Rain hit the street like thrown gravel, cold and sharp, bouncing off the curb and running in thin rivers toward the storm drain. The kind of rain that finds the seam in your coat, the crack in your shoes, the tiny weakness you didn't know you had. Headlights smeared into long white streaks through the windshield as Lucas Turner turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, hands tight on the wheel, jaw clenched like he was holding back a word. He hadn't been on this street in almost 2 years. He told himself it was because of work, airports, deadlines, investors, the nonstop pull of a life that never paused. He told himself his parents understood. He told himself they were fine. That was the lie that kept him moving. The porch light at 212 Maple Ridge used to glow warm like a small lighthouse. Tonight it was off. The house looked darker than the others, like it was holding its breath. Lucas slowed. His stomach dropped in a way he hadn't felt since he was a kid, and thought he'd lost his mother in a crowded store. Then he saw them. 2 figures on the sidewalk, bent under the rain, pressed close together as if their bodies could make a shelter the weather couldn't take. An old man with thin white hair plastered to his forehead, his shoulders shaking. An elderly woman clutching a plastic grocery bag to her chest like it was a life jacket, her cardigan soaked through and hanging heavy off her arms. Beside them sat 2 battered suitcases and a taped-up cardboard box, already sagging from the water. Lucas's foot slammed the brake so hard his seatbelt bit into his chest. For a second, his brain tried to turn the image into something else. A neighbor, a random couple waiting for a ride. Anyone but them. But when the woman lifted her face and the headlights caught her eyes, Lucas recognized the look immediately. It was his mother's face, not just the features, the expression, that quiet, stubborn attempt to pretend everything was okay, even while the world was falling apart. "Mom?" Lucas's voice came out thin, like it didn't belong to him. He threw the car into park and stumbled out into the rain. Cold soaked through his shirt in seconds. His shoes splashed in the gutter water as he ran. His father turned, slow like his neck hurt. Harold Turner, 79. The man who taught Lucas how to tie a knot and change a tire and say "thank you" like it mattered. Harold's hands were bare, red, trembling, knuckles swollen. Around his wrist was the old silver watch he'd worn for as long as Lucas could remember. The watch was stopped, the second hand frozen at 6:14. Lucas didn't know why that detail hit him like a punch, but it did. "Dad." "What?" Lucas dropped to his knees in the wet, right there on the sidewalk. "Why are you out here?" His mother, Margaret, tried to stand. Her knees buckled and she grabbed his arm. Her fingers felt like ice. "We're all right," she said fast, too fast. "Lucas, honey, you shouldn't be here. You're busy. You didn't have to come." "Didn't have to come?" His throat tightened. He looked from her soaked hair to the box falling apart in the rain. "Mom, you're outside, in the rain, with suitcases." "What happened?" Harold swallowed. His eyes flicked toward the house like it was dangerous to look at it. "Just a misunderstanding," Harold said, voice rough. "We'll sort it out. Don't make a fuss. A misunderstanding." Lucas stared at the front door. The curtains were drawn. No light, no movement, but the mailbox was stuffed, and the grass looked overgrown like nobody had cared for weeks. Then Lucas saw something else. A strip of paper taped to the front window, white against the dark glass. Not a holiday decoration, not a note from a neighbor, a notice. Lucas's heart thumped hard enough to make him dizzy. He squinted through the rain and headlights. He couldn't read it yet, but he didn't need to. He'd seen papers like that on office buildings and foreclosed homes. "Official, cold, final. Who put you out here?" Lucas asked, voice low. "Dad." "Mom, who did this?" Margaret's lips trembled. She looked down at the plastic bag in her hands. Inside was a framed photo, wrapped in a towel, like she'd tried to protect it more than herself. Harold said nothing, and in that silence, Lucas felt the real fear rise. Because this wasn't random. This wasn't a storm catching them on a walk. Someone had packed them. Someone had locked the door. Someone had decided they could sit out here and take it. Lucas pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around his mother's shoulders. Then he wrapped his arms around both of them. ignoring how soaked he was, ignoring the looks from passing cars. "Get in the car," he said. "Right now." Harold shook his head, stubborn as ever. "Lucas, don't. We don't want trouble." "Trouble?" Lucas's voice cracked. He stared at his father's stopped watch again, at the frozen second hand like time had been stolen. "Dad, you're shivering. Mom can barely stand. This is already trouble." Margaret whispered, "Your brother said—" "He said it was temporary." Lucas went still. "My brother?" he repeated. "Evan?" Margaret flinched like she'd said too much. Harold's jaw tightened, and Lucas watched the shame settle on his father's face like another layer of rain. Lucas had talked to Evan last week. Evan had laughed on the phone, said, "They're fine, Luke. They're watching their game shows. Dad's still talking about his garden like it's the Olympics. Stop stressing. Fine. Watching game shows. Garden." Lucas felt something break inside him, quiet and clean, like a thread snapping. He stood, rain dripping from his hair, and he looked at the dark house again. Somewhere behind those curtains, someone was warm and dry, and his parents were out here. If you've ever had that moment, when you realize the people you love have been suffering in silence, hit the like button and subscribe, because this story goes places Lucas never imagined. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, because I want to know how far these kinds of stories reach. Lucas lifted the box first, careful with the soggy cardboard, then grabbed the suitcases with one hand, guiding his parents with the other. His mother kept saying, it's okay, like she was trying to convince herself. His father kept looking over his shoulder, like he expected someone to come out and yell at them for taking their own things. As Lucas opened the car door, he noticed a folded piece of paper sticking out of the box, edges already melting from the rain. The top line was bold, official, and even in the dim light Lucas could read 3 words that made his blood run cold. Eviction order executed. Lucas's hands froze on the suitcase handle, because an eviction wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, and Lucas still didn't know who had signed it. When Lucas was 9, rain meant a metal bucket under the leak in the kitchen ceiling and his father's boots by the door. It meant the smell of wet earth and the sound of Harold's humming as he fixed whatever the weather had broken. Harold wasn't a man of speeches. He was a man of doing. On one of those nights the power went out. The whole neighborhood went dark, and Lucas had panicked, convinced the world had ended. Margaret lit a candle and set it on the table. The flame made their faces glow soft. Harold pulled out his old silver watch, held it up like it was a compass. "Listen," Harold told him. "Time keeps going, even when the lights go off. You don't have to be scared. You just have to keep your word." "Keep my word to who?" Lucas asked, voice small. Harold looked at Margaret first, then at Lucas. "To the people who count on you," he said. "That's what makes a man. Not money, not big talk. Your word." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Lucas's hand. Her skin smelled like dish soap and warm bread. "And you don't leave family out in the cold," she added, gentle but firm. "Even if they're stubborn, even if they're embarrassed, you don't leave them." Years later, when Lucas left for college in Chicago on a scholarship he hadn't thought he'd ever get, Harold pressed that same watch into his palm. "I wore it when I asked your mother to marry me," Harold said. "I wore it when you were born. It's not fancy, but it tells the truth. It's always honest about where you are." Lucas had laughed, young and full of speed. "Dad, I can buy you 10 watches." Harold shook his head, not offended, just steady. "I don't want 10 watches," he said. "I want one son who remembers where he came from." Lucas promised he would. He meant it, too. At first he called every Sunday. He drove home when he could, bringing groceries, fixing the porch steps, arguing with his father about whether a new roof was necessary or a waste. Margaret would cook too much food, smiling the whole time, as if feeding Lucas was the one thing the world couldn't take from her. The kitchen always smelled like onions and coffee and cinnamon. The old radio would play soft country music while Harold pretended he didn't like it. Then Lucas got his first real job, then a promotion, then a bigger city, then a bigger salary, then a new phone number, then a new life. The calls became shorter, the visits became rare, The excuses became smoother. "I'll come next month," Lucas would say. "Sure you will," Harold would answer, not angry, just tired. Margaret would jump in, always protecting Lucas from guilt. "He's building something, Harold. Let him." Lucas started sending money instead. More than they needed, he told himself. He paid off their old credit card. He set up automatic payments for their utilities. He ordered them a new TV online because the old one had a line down the middle. He did it all from a distance, like love could be delivered in boxes. And for a while, it seemed like it worked. Then Evan came into the picture in a new way. Evan was Lucas's younger brother, 4 years behind, the one who never left town, the one who stayed close. For years, Lucas had been grateful for that. Evan knew the neighbors, the church, the town gossip. Evan took Harold to the doctor when Lucas couldn't. Evan helped Margaret carry groceries. Evan called Lucas with updates. "They're good," Evan always said. "Stop worrying." Lucas wanted to believe him. He wanted it so badly, because believing it meant Lucas didn't have to face the other truth, that he had gotten used to being away, that guilt is like water. It finds a crack and fills it until you can't breathe. A few months ago, Lucas had called and asked to talk to his mother. Evan answered. "Mom's resting," Evan said. "She's been tired lately." "Let me talk to Dad then." "Dad's out back," Evan replied. "You know how he is. He'll call you later." Later never came. Lucas had sent a text to his mother. "Love you. Miss you. Everything okay?" The reply came 2 days later. "We're fine, sweetheart. Proud of you. Busy week." The words were right, but something about them felt off. Margaret usually added a heart, or asked if he was eating enough, or told him she'd made soup and froze some, just in case. This message felt clean, trimmed, like someone had cut away the warmth. Lucas ignored that feeling, the way people ignore a strange noise in their car until the engine dies, because he was in meetings, because he was traveling, because he was building a company, because he had employees who depended on him, because he was tired, and because, if he was honest, he didn't want to hear fear in his mother's voice. He didn't want to hear disappointment in his father's silence. It was easier to accept Evan's version. They're fine. But now, with his parents trembling in his back seat, the rain drumming on the roof like an accusation, Lucas saw the past in sharp pieces. He saw his father's watch. He saw his mother's candlelight. He saw promises made at a kitchen table, and he realized something that made his throat burn. He hadn't broken his word in one big moment. He had broken it slowly, with 1,000 small choices. The car heater blew warm air, but Harold didn't relax. He sat stiff, hands in his lap, eyes on the wet window. Margaret clutched the plastic bag with the wrapped photo. Every few seconds she glanced at Lucas, like she was afraid he might vanish if she looked away too long. Lucas turned down the street toward the nearest motel, because he didn't know where else to take them yet. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't even know if the house was still legally theirs. At a red light, his phone buzzed. A message from Evan. "Where are you?" Lucas stared at the screen, his pulse rising. Because Evan hadn't asked if the parents were okay. He hadn't asked why they were out in the rain. He'd asked where Lucas was. And Lucas suddenly understood that Evan already knew exactly what had happened. But Lucas still didn't know how far Evan was willing to go to keep control. There was a summer when Harold's plant cut hours and the Turner family lived on canned beans and Margaret's careful grocery lists. Lucas remembered watching his mother with a coupon folder spread out on the table like a map. She would circle prices with a pen, then smile like it was a game she was winning. "Why don't we just buy what we want?" Lucas had asked, pouting. Margaret had tucked hair behind her ear and said, "Because wanting isn't the same as needing, and because we take care of each other first." That same week, Harold came home with a brown paper bag and set it on the counter. Inside was a pair of new cleats. Lucas's eyes had lit up. "For me?" Harold nodded once. "Coach says you run like your shoes are holding you back," he said. "But," Lucas looked at the bag, then at the empty cabinets. "Dad, you don't have to." Harold's face had been tired, but his voice was steady. "I don't have to," he agreed. "I choose to." Lucas hadn't understood then that sacrifice is often quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in small, stubborn acts. There was also the winter when a neighbor's furnace broke and the family down the street had 2 little kids. Harold had gone over with his toolbox, even though their own heat was barely working. Margaret had asked, worried, "Harold, what about us?" Harold had kissed her forehead. "We're warm enough," he said. "They're not." That was Harold's religion, even more than church on Sunday. Warm enough. Lucas used to think his parents were unbreakable because they always found a way. He never saw the cost until he was older, until he heard the strain in Harold's breath after climbing stairs, until he saw Margaret sit for a moment too long at the kitchen table, eyes closed, as if resting was something she had to steal. Still, they kept giving. So when Lucas got successful, the guilt didn't come from forgetting them entirely. It came from telling himself that money could replace presence, that a paid bill could replace a held hand, that he could be a good son from a distance because the distance made it easier to breathe. Now, as the wipers slapped back and forth, Lucas heard Harold's old words in his head like a warning he'd ignored for too long. Time keeps going, even when the lights go off. And Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in that dark house on Maple Ridge, the lights had gone off on purpose. Lucas checked them into a motel off the interstate, the kind with a flickering sign and a lobby that smelled like lemon cleaner, trying to hide old smoke. He hated it. It felt wrong to put Harold and Margaret in a place like that, but it was warm, and it was available. And right now, warm was all he could promise. In the room, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed with her wet shoes still on, staring at her hands like she didn't recognize them. Harold stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot, shoulders tight, as if he needed to guard the world even now. Lucas put the suitcases down and turned to them. "Tell me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Start from the beginning." Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes filled fast. Harold spoke instead. "We didn't want to bother you," he said. "Bother me?" Lucas took a step forward. "Dad, you were outside in the rain." Harold's jaw worked. "We thought we had it handled. Evan said he was taking care of things." Lucas's chest tightened. "What things?" Margaret finally whispered. "The bills." Lucas blinked. "I pay the bills." Harold's eyes flicked to the nightstand, where Lucas had set the soaked eviction paper to dry. "Not all of them," Harold said. Lucas pulled his phone out, hands shaking with anger and fear, and opened his banking app. He had set up automatic transfers years ago. Every month money went into his parents' account. He'd even labeled it in his own head like a promise. "Mom and Dad." He scrolled. The transfers were there, but the account number looked unfamiliar. His stomach sank. He clicked into it. A joint account, opened 6 months ago, with Evan Turner listed as a co-owner. Lucas stared. He didn't remember authorizing that. He didn't remember signing anything. "Did you add Evan to your account?" Lucas asked his mother. Margaret's face crumpled. "He said we needed help," she murmured. "He said the bank was changing things. He said it would protect us." Harold's voice went flat. "He said you told him to." Lucas felt heat rise into his throat. "Dad, I never—" Harold lifted a hand, cutting him off. "I know," he said quieter. "I know now. But at the time, it sounded like you. It sounded like something you'd arrange from far away." Lucas sat on the other bed, head spinning. That was the thing about distance. It creates space for other voices to fill in, space for someone to imitate you, to speak for you, to rearrange your love into something useful for them. Lucas thought back over the last year, and memories shifted into a different shape. The way Evan always answered the house phone, the way Evan always seemed to be right there when Lucas called, the way Margaret's voice would sound tired, then Evan would jump in and say, "Mom needs rest, Luke. Let her." The times Lucas asked Harold if he needed anything, and Harold just said, "We're fine," too quickly, like he was reading from a script. Lucas had told himself they were proud, stubborn. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, because there were other moments, small and sharp, that Lucas had dismissed. Like the time he mailed a birthday card with cash inside, and his mother thanked him on the phone but didn't mention the card. Lucas asked, joking, "Did Dad steal it?" And Evan laughed too loud and said, "Mail's been weird." Maybe it got lost. Or the time Lucas tried to FaceTime and Evan said, "Camera's broken on their phone," for months. Or the way his mother's texts stopped using her usual spelling mistakes. She always typed love and hun. Then suddenly it was perfect punctuation. Lucas had felt it, the wrongness. He just hadn't wanted to admit it, because admitting it meant admitting he wasn't there. It meant admitting that in the space he left, someone had built a wall. Lucas swallowed hard. "Okay," he said. "Tell me about tonight. Who told you to leave the house?" Margaret looked toward Harold, as if asking permission to speak. Harold's shoulders rose and fell slowly. "A deputy came," he said. "Said there was an order. Evan wasn't home." Why weren't you home?" Lucas demanded without meaning to. Harold's eyes flashed hurt. "Because Evan told us to go to the church office," he snapped. "Said there were papers to sign for a property tax exemption. We sat there for 2 hours and nobody knew what he was talking about. When we came back, the locks were changed." Margaret covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. "They wouldn't let us in," she said. "I knocked and knocked. I could hear someone inside. I heard the TV. But they didn't open." Lucas's vision blurred with rage. "Who was inside?" Margaret's voice was almost a breath. "Kendra." Lucas froze. Kendra, Evan's wife, smart, polished, always smiling too tightly at family dinners, the one who called Harold Mr. Turner like he was a stranger, the one who once told Margaret, "You don't have to keep so much clutter," while looking at their family photos like they were trash. Lucas had always thought Kendra was just ambitious, a little cold, not evil. Margaret wiped her cheek with the sleeve of her wet cardigan. She said it wasn't our home anymore." Lucas's hands curled into fists. "On what basis?" Harold's voice dropped. "They said we were behind, on payments, on taxes, something. It changed every time we asked, and every time we tried to call you, Evan said he'd handle it. He said you were too busy. He said you didn't need the stress." Lucas felt a sharp shame, because Evan had been right about one thing. Lucas didn't want the stress. He'd let someone else hold it. He'd let his brother stand between him and his parents because it was convenient. Outside, thunder rolled, distant, but heavy. The motel heater clicked and hummed. Margaret's hands still shook. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom," he said softly, "did you ever try to call me directly?" Margaret hesitated. "Evan said you changed your number," she admitted. "He said you had security. He said it was better to go through him." Lucas's throat closed. "I never changed my number." Harold let out a breath like it hurt. "He told us you were busy with important people, that you didn't want interruptions." Lucas stared at the carpet, feeling the weight of that lie settle over everything. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just a house. It was control. Evan and Kendra had taken over the story of Lucas's life in his parents' minds. They had turned him into a distant, selfish son, because it made Harold and Margaret easier to isolate, easier to shame, easier to move around like furniture. Lucas looked up. "Dad," he said, voice firm now, "I need you to trust me. Whatever you signed, whatever they told you, we are going to fix this." Harold's eyes were wet, but he blinked it back. "I don't want revenge," he said, voice low. "I want respect." Those words hit Lucas so hard he felt them in his bones. Lucas nodded. "You're going to get it," he promised. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Evan. "Don't do anything stupid. Come talk like adults." Lucas's fingers hovered over the screen, because for the first time, Lucas realized Evan wasn't scared of being caught. Evan was sure Lucas didn't have proof, and Lucas didn't know yet what Evan had done with the papers Harold and Margaret had signed. Lucas thought about the last time he'd been home for real. It was a rushed weekend, a quick hug at the door, a bag of groceries dropped on the counter, a promise to stay longer next time. He remembered standing in the driveway with his phone pressed to his ear, half listening to his father talk about the neighbor's new fence while an investor waited on the other line. He remembered saying, "Yeah, Dad, sounds good," without really hearing, then watching Harold's face fall for just a second before he covered it. Lucas had told himself he was doing all this for them, for a better life, for security, for pride. But pride is a tricky thing. It can sound like love and still leave people alone. Now, sitting in a cheap motel room with rain streaking the window, Lucas saw how his success had created a blind spot. Everyone around him in the city expected him to be untouchable, always winning, always in control. He had started to believe that story, and he had stopped checking the parts that mattered most. He stood and walked to Harold. "Dad," he said quietly, "can I see your phone?" Harold pulled an old flip phone from his pocket, careful, like it was fragile. Lucas opened it and scrolled through the call history. Dozens of outgoing calls. Not to Lucas, to Evan. Over and over. Lucas's chest tightened, because it meant his parents had been reaching out, just not to the person who could save them. And Lucas suddenly wondered what Evan had told them after each call ended. The next morning the rain stopped, but the sky stayed gray, like it wasn't done judging anyone yet. Lucas bought coffee and oatmeal from the motel vending area, the kind of breakfast that felt like an apology. Margaret barely ate. Harold sat at the tiny table, hands wrapped around a paper cup, staring at the stopped watch on his wrist as if he could will it back to life. Lucas drove to Maple Ridge as soon as the sun came up. He parked across the street and stared at the house that had held his entire childhood. The porch steps, the chipped railing, the little wind chime Margaret loved, shaped like a star, swaying slightly even without wind. He walked up to the door and tried the knob. Locked. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. The curtain in the living room twitched. Lucas's pulse hammered. He stepped closer to the window. "Kendra," he called, voice calm but sharp. "Open the door." A moment later, the front door cracked open. Kendra stood there in a clean sweater, hair neatly pulled back, holding a mug like this was a normal morning. Her eyes flicked over Lucas's wet shoes, his tired face, the tension in his shoulders. "Lucas," she said, drawing out his name like a question. "You're here. Where are my parents?" Lucas asked. Kendra's smile didn't move. "They're safe," she replied. "Evan said you might overreact. I see he was right." Lucas stared at her. "Safe where?" Kendra took a slow sip from her mug. "In a motel, apparently," she said. "Evan texted me. He said you made a scene." Lucas felt his hands tighten. They were outside in the rain. Kendra tilted her head. "It's winter in Ohio," she said, as if that explained everything. "They'll survive." That was the moment Lucas understood she wasn't just cold. She was organized. She opened the door wider, not inviting Lucas in, just making it harder for the neighbors to hear. "Lucas," she said, voice softer now, almost reasonable. "You live far away. You don't know what it's been like. Your parents have been difficult, stubborn, behind on things, refusing help. And Evan and I have been carrying it." "Carrying it," Lucas repeated. Kendra's eyes flicked toward the hallway where family photos used to hang. "They can't keep up with the house," she said. "They forget things. They lose mail. They don't understand modern banking. They need someone to manage reality." Lucas's stomach twisted. "So you put them out?" Kendra exhaled like she was tired of explaining. "We didn't put them out. We followed legal steps. There are consequences when you don't pay." Lucas stepped forward. "Show me the paperwork." Kendra's gaze sharpened. "Why?" "Because I'm their son," Lucas said. "And I'm telling you right now, I'm not leaving until I see what you've done." Kendra's jaw tightened for the first time. "Evan's not here," she said. "He's at work. When he gets back, we can talk." Lucas didn't blink. "Then I'll wait." Kendra held his stare. Something calculated moved behind her eyes. Then she smiled again, smaller, and reached behind the door. She pulled out a folder. Too neat, too prepared to be random. "These are copies," she said, holding it up but not handing it over. "This is a legal eviction based on unpaid property taxes and violations. There was a notice period. There were hearings. Your father signed." Lucas's heart pounded. "My father signed what?" Kendra's fingers tapped the folder, gentle, like she was patting a dog. "Power of attorney," she said. "Temporary, to help manage finances. Then the reverse mortgage paperwork. Then the repayment plan." He didn't follow it. Lucas felt the world tilt. "Reverse mortgage?" Kendra's voice stayed smooth. "It was necessary," she said. "Evan and I had expenses. Medical. Repairs. Your parents refused to downsize. This house is too much for them. We made a practical choice." Practical. It was the same word corporate people used when they fired employees 2 weeks before Christmas. Lucas held out his hand. "Give me the copies." Kendra hesitated, then slid a few pages out, keeping the folder close. Lucas scanned them fast. Official letterhead, county seal, dates, signatures. Harold Turner's signature was there, but it looked wrong. Lucas had seen his father sign checks for years. Harold's signature was slow, heavy, with a distinctive curl at the end of the last letter. This signature was shaky, rushed, like someone had guided his hand. Lucas looked up. "Where is the original?" Kendra's eyes narrowed. "With the bank. With the county. With the lawyers." Lucas's phone buzzed. A call from Evan. Lucas answered, putting it on speaker. "Evan," he said, voice steady. "Where are you?" Evan's voice came through too cheerful, like he was trying to sound normal. "Luke, man, what are you doing? Kendra said you're at the house. Can you not do this right now?" "Do what?" Lucas asked. "Ask why our parents were left outside?" Evan sighed into the phone, heavy, practiced. "They weren't left. They're dramatic. You know how Dad is. He refuses help until things get bad, then he acts like the world attacked him." Lucas stared at the paperwork. "Did you get power of attorney?" A pause. Then Evan's tone shifted to irritated. "Yeah," he said, "because somebody had to. You live in Texas and think Venmo fixes everything. I didn't authorize you to change their bank accounts," Lucas said. Evan laughed once, short. "You don't have to authorize," he replied. "They did. They asked us. They needed help. We stepped up, like you always wanted." Lucas felt rage flare, but he forced his voice down. "Where are the originals, Evan?" Evan's breath came through the speaker. "Why are you acting like a cop?" he snapped. "Look, Luke, we can talk, but not in front of neighbors, not at the house. Come meet me at the diner. 10 minutes. "Why the diner?" Lucas asked. "Because I'm not letting you barge in and scare Mom and Dad and make them think you're here to rescue them," Evan said quickly. "They don't need that. They need stability." Stability. Lucas realized Evan was using the same language Kendra used. The same logic. It wasn't emotional. It was strategic. They weren't just taking money. They were rewriting reality. Lucas looked past Kendra's shoulder into the house. Something was missing. The old quilt Margaret kept on the couch. The family photo wall. The smell of coffee. The house felt staged, like someone had erased Harold and Margaret from it. "Kendra," Lucas said softly, "where are their things?" Kendra's eyes flashed. "We stored them," she said. "Where?" Another pause. Lucas stepped back from the doorway, mind racing. Because if Kendra and Evan were telling the truth, there would be records. There would be legal transparency. They would want him to see it. They would want him to agree. But they didn't. They wanted him contained in a diner booth, away from papers, away from witnesses, away from the house that could speak. Lucas put his phone back to his ear. "Evan," he said, "I'll meet you." Evan let out a relieved breath. "Good. Like an adult." Lucas hung up. Kendra watched him, smile returning. "See?" she said. "This is better." Lucas nodded once, turning to leave. But as he walked down the steps, he noticed a small security camera mounted under the porch roof, angled toward the driveway. New. Cheap. The kind you buy online. Lucas's stomach tightened, because someone had installed a camera after his parents were put out. Not for their safety, for control. And Lucas suddenly wondered what that camera had already recorded. Lucas remembered Evan as a teenager, always watching Lucas with a mix of admiration and irritation. Evan was the one who stayed, who helped, who fixed things, who heard every complaint and worry. Lucas was the one who left and got praised anyway. At their last Thanksgiving together, Evan had joked, "Must be nice to have a family you can visit like a museum." Everyone laughed, including Lucas. But Evan's eyes hadn't been laughing. Kendra had been there too, talking about assets and equity, like she couldn't see the people behind the walls. She would mention the house value the way other people mentioned the weather. "You know, this neighborhood is climbing," she'd said once, smiling at Margaret like it was a compliment. "You're sitting on a fortune." Margaret had just smiled back and said, "We're sitting on memories." Kendra hadn't smiled then. Those little moments, the ones Lucas ignored because they seemed harmless, now looked like warning lights. Evan's resentment, Kendra's hunger, their belief that being close gave them permission, their belief that taking was the same as managing, and if they'd already taken power of attorney, Lucas knew they weren't going to let it go politely. Not without a fight, and not without making Harold and Margaret feel guilty for resisting. Sitting in his rental car outside the diner, Lucas tried to slow his breathing. The parking lot smelled like wet asphalt and fried onions drifting from the kitchen vents. He could see Evan's pickup already there. Evan wanted a controlled conversation, a neat explanation over coffee. Lucas knew he couldn't afford to walk in blind, because if Evan and Kendra had been planning this, they had already practiced their story. As Lucas watched the diner door, he found himself thinking back to the moment he made the decision to come home without warning, the moment he stopped trusting everything is fine. It wasn't one thing. It was a stack of small things that finally tipped. 2 weeks earlier, Lucas had been in Austin, in a glass conference room on the 32nd floor, talking about growth projections and brand partnerships. His calendar was color-coded, his phone never stopped, his life measured in minutes. Between meetings, he checked his voicemail and saw a message from an unknown number. He almost deleted it. Then he heard his mother's voice, not the bright, cheery voice she used to protect him. A weaker voice, strained like she was speaking through pain. "Lucas, honey, if you get this," she had whispered. There was a pause, a breath that sounded like it caught. "Just call me, please." Then the line went dead. Lucas had called back immediately. The number was disconnected. He had called Evan. Evan had answered with his usual calm. "Mom?" "She's fine," Evan said. "She probably hit the wrong button. You know how she is." Lucas tried to laugh it off, but his skin prickled. "Evan, she sounded scared." "You're hearing what you want to hear," Evan replied. "You're always waiting for drama." Lucas had hung up, but the voicemail stayed in his head like a splinter. That night he got an email from the bank. Unusual activity detected. A new device had accessed his parents' account. Lucas clicked the alert. The location was back home. Lucas texted Evan. Evan didn't respond for 6 hours. When he did, he wrote, "Just setting things up to make it easier." Dad asked. Lucas stared at the message and felt something tighten. Because Harold didn't ask for setting things up. Harold asked for a wrench. The next day, Lucas went to his apartment and opened a drawer where he kept old things he couldn't throw away. A shoebox with childhood photos, a few letters from his parents, the watch Harold gave him, except Lucas didn't wear it anymore. He told himself it didn't match his new style. That was another lie. He pulled out the watch. The second hand was still moving, but it felt heavier in his palm than it used to. He flipped it over and saw a scratch on the back. An old mark from when he dropped it at 16. He remembered Harold picking it up, checking it, and saying, "Still tells the truth." Lucas opened the box further and found a folded recipe card in Margaret's handwriting. Her famous chicken soup, the one she swore could fix anything. On the back she'd written, "For Lucas when he gets sick. Bring him home." He hadn't brought himself home, he'd brought himself farther away. Lucas stared at the card, and something in him shifted from guilt to fear. Because guilt says, you should call more. Fear says, something is happening, and you don't know what. Then came the final trigger. A package arrived at Lucas's office addressed in his father's handwriting. Lucas hadn't seen that handwriting in months. Inside was a single object, the small brass porch light pulled chain from the old house, the one shaped like a tiny star. It had broken years ago, and Harold fixed it with tape, refusing to replace it because Margaret liked it. There was no note, no explanation, just the star chain, wrapped in tissue paper. Lucas called his parents again. Evan answered. "Why did Dad send me a porch light chain?" Lucas demanded. Evan sighed like Lucas was being ridiculous. "He didn't," Evan said. "He probably found it in a box and you're imagining things." "He wrote the address," Lucas insisted. "Luke!" Evan said, voice hardening. "You're not coming here to start problems. If you show up, you'll confuse them. They're old. They need routine." Routine. That word hit Lucas like a slap. Because Lucas suddenly understood Evan didn't want him to visit. Evan wanted him gone. And if someone doesn't want you to see something, it's because they're hiding it. Lucas booked a flight that night. He didn't tell Evan. He didn't tell anyone. He told his assistant he had a family emergency and left his laptop behind like it didn't matter. At the airport, he watched people rush to gates, dragging bags, buying coffee, living lives that looked normal. Lucas sat with his phone in his hand and played the voicemail again and again, trying to hear what was behind his mother's words. He thought of his father's watch. He thought of the broken porch light star. He thought of Margaret's recipe card telling him to come home. He landed in Columbus, rented a car, and drove through familiar highways that felt smaller than he remembered. He passed the exit for his old high school, the diner, the church, the hardware store where Harold used to buy bolts in bulk because you never know. When he finally turned onto Maple Ridge and saw his porch light off, his heart started pounding. And when he saw his parents in the rain, all the little triggers snapped into one clear truth. The emergency wasn't a feeling. It was real. On the drive from the airport, Lucas stopped at a gas station off Route 23. The clerk was an older man with a Browns hat and tired eyes, the kind of face Lucas used to see every day growing up. Lucas bought a bottle of water and asked, without thinking, "You ever get that feeling that you're too late?" The clerk looked at him for a second, then shrugged. "All the time," he said. "That's why you don't ignore your gut." Lucas drove on with that sentence sitting heavy in his chest. He tried calling his mother again while the road rolled under him, straight to voicemail. He tried his father. Busy signal. He tried the house phone. No answer. Every mile home felt like a countdown. At one point he pulled into a rest stop and sat in the car with his head on the steering wheel, breathing hard. He had this image of pulling up to the house and finding nothing wrong, finding his parents watching TV, finding Evan smiling like Lucas was paranoid. He imagined how embarrassed he would feel, how he would apologize, how he would tell himself he'd overreacted. For a moment that embarrassment almost turned the car around. Then he remembered the sound in his mother's voice on that voicemail. Not dramatic, not performative, just small, like she was trying to whisper past someone standing close. Lucas realized then that if Evan was filtering calls, he was also listening. He was monitoring. He was controlling even the air around them. And if Margaret managed to send a package, managed to get a porch light chain into a box, it wasn't because she wanted to be sentimental. It was because she couldn't say, "Help," not out loud. When Lucas finally got close to the neighborhood, he saw a yard sign across the street from his parents' place that made his stomach flip even before he pulled onto Maple Ridge. For sale by owner. He told himself it was a neighbor's sign. He told himself he was mistaken in the rain and dusk. But when he turned the corner and saw the sign planted right in front of his parents' lawn, the letters sharp and bold, his hands went numb on the wheel. There hadn't been a sign when he last visited. Someone had been preparing to sell. Lucas called Evan right then, while still driving, voice shaking. Evan didn't answer. Lucas called again. Straight to voicemail. Lucas left a message that was more prayer than threat. "Evan, pick up. I'm almost there. If anything's wrong, if you've done something, just tell me now." Evan never called back. And when Lucas pulled onto Maple Ridge and saw the porch light off and his parents in the rain, he understood why. Because Evan didn't want Lucas to arrive early enough to stop it. He wanted Lucas to arrive just late enough to accept it. And Lucas knew in that moment that the real fight wasn't going to be about a house. It was going to be about whether Harold and Margaret were still seen as people, or just paperwork, and Lucas was done letting anyone else define that. Lucas didn't go into the diner right away. He watched Evan's truck from across the lot and made a choice that surprised even him. He drove away, not because he was scared, because he was learning. Evan wanted the diner because it was public enough to control volume, but private enough to control details. Evan wanted a conversation, not an investigation. Lucas needed the truth, and the truth was rarely served with coffee and pie. He drove back into the neighborhood, slower this time, letting his eyes absorb everything he'd missed in the dark and rain. Maple Ridge wasn't flashy. It was working class, tidy, with porches and mailboxes and kids' bikes left in driveways. The kind of place where people watched out of their windows and pretended they weren't watching. The kind of place where everyone knew when an ambulance came, and everyone pretended they didn't. Lucas parked near the corner and stepped out into air that smelled like wet leaves and exhaust. The street was quiet, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt cautious. Across from his parents' house lived Mrs. Jensen, a widow in her 70s who used to give Lucas candy on Halloween even when he was too old to trick or treat. Her curtains shifted when Lucas walked up her steps. He knocked. The door opened a crack, chain still on, and Mrs. Jensen peered out. Her eyes widened. "Lucas," she whispered, like she'd seen a ghost. "It's me," Lucas said. "Mrs. Jensen, I need to ask you something." Her face tightened with concern. She glanced over Lucas's shoulder toward the Turner's house, then back. "You shouldn't stand out here," she said. "Come in." Inside, her living room smelled like lavender and old newspapers. The TV was on low volume, but she muted it immediately. "Are my parents okay?" Lucas asked. Mrs. Jensen's eyes filled fast. "Oh, honey," she breathed. "I've been praying you'd come." Lucas swallowed. "What happened?" Mrs. Jensen sat in her recliner, hands wringing a tissue. "Your brother, and that wife of his," she said, voice sharp now. "They moved in like they owned the place. At first they were helping, bringing groceries, taking your dad to appointments. Fine, we all thought it was nice." Lucas's stomach nodded. "But then," Mrs. Jensen continued, "your parents stopped coming outside. No more porch sits, no more waving. Your mama used to wave at me every morning with her coffee. Then the curtains stayed closed. The car stopped moving, and when I asked, Evan always said, 'They're resting.'" Lucas felt heat in his face. "Did you ever talk to them?" Mrs. Jensen nodded slowly. "Once," she said. "About a month ago. I saw your mama at the mailbox real quick. She looked thinner. She tried to smile, but her hands were shaking. She whispered, 'We're okay,' like she was trying to convince me." Mrs. Jensen leaned forward, and then Kendra came out of the house like a police officer and said, "Mrs. Jensen, please stop stressing them out. Like your mother was a child." Lucas clenched his jaw. "Did anyone call the police?" Mrs. Jensen laughed without humor. "And say what? That grown people are being treated badly in their own home? That doesn't make a good report," she said. "But I did call the church. Pastor Reed came over. He was turned away at the door." Lucas's throat tightened. "Turned away?" Mrs. Jensen nodded. "Kendra said Harold didn't want visitors. Pastor Reed said Harold had never turned him away in 30 years. Kendra just smiled and said, 'People change.'" Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Then 2 weeks ago," Mrs. Jensen went on, "there was a moving truck. Not big. More like a rental. Kendra was loading boxes. I asked her what was going on. She said, 'We're decluttering.'" Decluttering. Lucas saw his mother's framed photo wrapped in a towel. Decluttering meant erasing. Mrs. Jensen's voice lowered. "A deputy came 3 days ago. I watched from this window. He knocked, waited, then walked around with Evan. They pointed at the doors. Then the next day I saw a locksmith. And last night I saw your parents sitting out there in the rain." Mrs. Jensen pressed a hand to her chest. "Lucas, I wanted to run out. I wanted to bring them inside. But Evan was watching. Kendra was watching. And I was scared I'd make it worse." Lucas nodded, understanding her fear. "That's how control works. It doesn't have to be violent. It just has to make good people hesitate." "Mrs. Jensen?" Lucas asked. "Did you see any papers? Hear anything?" She hesitated, then got up and shuffled toward a cabinet. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small black notebook. "I write things down," she said defensively. "My memory isn't what it used to be." Lucas took the notebook carefully. The pages were filled with dates and notes in neat handwriting. Mrs. Jensen had written down moments she couldn't forget. March 12th, Evan yelling at Harold in the driveway the words, "You're impossible." April 3rd, Kendra telling Margaret, "Sign it or we can't help you." April 27th, muffled crying through an open window. May 1st, a rental truck and boxes, picture frames carried out. May 9th, a locksmith and a deputy in uniform at the door. Lucas's throat tightened. "Why didn't you call me?" Lucas asked softly. Mrs. Jensen's eyes filled again. "Honey, I didn't have your number," she said, "and Evan told me you were off limits. He said you had security now and you didn't want people bothering you." Lucas exhaled hard. Evan had been building a fence around Lucas too, keeping people from reaching him. Lucas handed the notebook back. "Thank you," he said. "This matters." Mrs. Jensen stared at him, pleading. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them take your parents' house. Harold built that porch with his own hands." Lucas nodded. "I won't." When Lucas stepped outside again, he looked at the street with new eyes. The kids' bikes, the trimmed lawns, the quiet. It wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a witness. And witnesses had stories if you asked the right way. Lucas drove to the little church on the edge of town, the one with the white steeple Harold used to fix every other summer. Pastor Reed was in his office, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes that sharpened when he saw Lucas. "Lucas Turner," he said, standing fast. "Thank God." Lucas didn't sit. "Pastor," he said, "did you go to my parents' house?" Pastor Reed's face tightened. "Yes," he admitted. "Margaret called me late at night from a number I didn't recognize. She didn't say much. She just said, 'Can you pray for us?' Then the line went dead." Lucas's chest clenched. "I went the next day," Pastor Reed continued. "Kendra answered. She said Harold didn't want me there. I asked to see him. She refused. I asked if Margaret was okay. She said, 'They're fine.'" Pastor Reed leaned in. "Lucas, I'm going to be honest. I felt something wrong. I called Adult Protective Services. They said they'd note it, but without direct access, without the elderly person asking for help, there's not much they can do quickly." Lucas felt anger and helplessness collide. "So what can we do?" Pastor Reed's eyes held his. "We can get them safe," he said, "and we can shine light." Light. Lucas thought of the porch light, the broken star pull chain. Pastor Reed added softly, "And sometimes light makes people desperate." Lucas drove back toward the motel, mind racing. He didn't have a lawyer here yet. He didn't have official documents. He had memories, a neighbor's notebook, a pastor's concern. He needed proof. As he pulled into the motel parking lot, a beat-up sedan parked 2 spaces away. Mrs. Jensen stepped out, holding something in her hand. Lucas got out of his car. "Mrs. Jensen?" he called. She hurried over, eyes darting around. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, "but I remembered something." She held up a small USB drive, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag. "My grandson set up my doorbell camera," she said. "It records the street. Last night it recorded your parents being put out, and it recorded who changed the locks." Lucas's heart slammed. "Did it record faces?" he asked. Mrs. Jensen nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes," she whispered. "And Lucas, it recorded Evan telling your father, 'Sign, or you sleep outside.'" Lucas's hands went cold as he took the USB drive, because now he wasn't chasing a feeling. He was holding evidence. And Lucas knew the moment Evan realized there was video, the game would change. Back in the motel room, Margaret was sitting on the bed with a towel around her shoulders. Lucas had found a pharmacy open late and bought her dry socks, a simple cardigan, and a small bottle of lotion because her hands were cracking from cold. He tried to do normal things, like normal could fix what had happened. Harold had refused to take off his wet jacket until Lucas raised his voice. Even then, Harold moved slowly, like every motion cost him pride. Lucas set the USB drive on the table like it was fragile. Then he sat across from his parents and took a breath. "Mom," he said, keeping his tone gentle, "I need to see if you're hurt." Margaret shook her head immediately. "No," she said, "I'm fine." Lucas didn't argue. He simply reached for her hand and turned it over. Her knuckles were swollen. The skin was raw, scraped. "From the door," she whispered, eyes down. "I knocked too hard." Lucas felt his throat tighten. "Did you have your medication?" he asked. Margaret hesitated. "Some," she said, and that one word told him everything. Lucas stood and opened the cardboard box he'd rescued from the rain. The tape was peeling, the corners soft. Inside were things that looked like the last pieces of a life: a Bible with a worn cover, a stack of mail tied with string, a tin of sewing supplies, a small plastic bag with pill bottles, and a framed photo wrapped in a towel. Lucas lifted the photo carefully and unwrapped it. It was an old family picture from Lucas's high school graduation. Harold's arm around Margaret. Margaret smiling like her heart couldn't contain it. Lucas in a cheap cap and gown, young and excited, looking at the camera like the future was simple. Margaret watched Lucas hold it, and her eyes filled again. "I couldn't leave it," she whispered. "Kendra said it was junk. She said we had too many pictures." Harold's jaw clenched. "She threw out your mother's recipe box," he said suddenly, voice thick. "The one from her mother. She said it was clutter." Margaret covered her face with her hands. "I tried to hide the chicken soup card," she murmured. "The one I wrote for you. She found it. She said, 'He doesn't need your little cards. He has a chef now.'" Lucas's chest burned. "Mom," he said, voice shaking. "I don't have a chef." Margaret laughed once, broken. "She said you did," she whispered. "She said you were too good for this place now. Too good for us." Lucas leaned forward. "Who said that? Kendra?" Margaret nodded, tears slipping. "Evan didn't say it like that," she added quickly, still protecting him even now. But he didn't stop her. Harold stared at the wall, breathing heavy. Lucas noticed how thin his father looked. His cheeks were hollow. His hands shook more than Lucas remembered. "Dad," Lucas said softly, "when was your last doctor appointment?" Harold's eyes flicked away. "I'm fine," he said. Lucas didn't buy it. He walked to the bathroom and came back with a small first aid kit he'd grabbed from the pharmacy and a fresh bottle of water. "Dad," he said, "I'm not asking to judge you. I'm asking to help." Harold's shoulders rose and fell. Finally he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper, edges worn from being held too often. Lucas took it. A hospital discharge sheet, 3 weeks old. It mentioned a minor stroke. Follow-up required. Medication listed. Lucas's heart stopped. "Dad," he whispered, "you had a stroke?" Harold's eyes flashed with anger, not at Lucas, but at himself. "It wasn't a big one," he muttered. "Just, my hand went numb. They said I needed rest." Margaret whispered, "Evan said we shouldn't tell you. He said it would distract you. He said you'd panic and stop working." Lucas felt like the air left the room. "So you didn't tell me because Evan told you not to." Harold's face crumpled for a second. "He said you'd blame us," Harold admitted. "He said you'd say we were too much trouble." Lucas closed his eyes, swallowing pain and fury. "Dad," he said, voice low, "I have never—" Harold lifted a trembling hand. "I know," he said, "I know. But when you're old, you start believing you're a burden. You start believing the story people tell you, especially when the story makes them powerful." Lucas looked at his mother. She was shaking, holding her own arms like she could keep herself together that way. "Mom," Lucas asked, "why didn't you call me when the money started changing? When the visits stopped? When the papers showed up?" Margaret's eyes met his. They were tired, not just physically, tired in a way that comes from being reduced. "Because Evan said you'd be angry," she whispered. "Because Kendra said you'd blame me. She said, if Lucas has to come back here, it's your fault his life falls apart." Lucas stared at her, stunned. "She said that to you?" Margaret nodded. "She said, do you want to ruin him? Do you want to take him away from his future? You already took enough by having him." Harold's fist hit the table, a small sound but full of years. "I should have thrown them out," he said, voice rough. "I should have stood up sooner." Lucas reached across and grabbed his father's hand. "Dad," he said, "you did stand up. You just did it in the way you knew how. You kept trying to keep peace. You kept trying to keep your word." Harold stared at Lucas's hand gripping his, and for a moment his eyes softened. "I don't want revenge," he repeated. "I want respect." Lucas nodded. "And you're going to have it." Then Margaret spoke, almost too quiet to hear. "Lucas," she whispered. "They took your father's watch once." Lucas's chest tightened. "What?" Margaret looked at the stopped watch on Harold's wrist. Kendra said it looked valuable. She took it and hid it. Your father went into a panic. He couldn't sleep. He kept saying, "That watch tells the truth." Margaret swallowed. Evan brought it back and said, "See? We're not stealing. Stop accusing us." "But it came back different." Lucas leaned closer. "Different how?" Margaret's voice shook. "The back was scratched in a new place," she said, "and the clasp was loose, like someone forced it." Lucas's mind raced. The watch, the paperwork, the reverse mortgage, the bank account. What if the watch wasn't just sentimental? What if it had been used as collateral, pawned, something? Lucas glanced again at the frozen second hand. 6:14. "When did it stop?" Lucas asked. Harold looked down at it. "Last night," he said, "right before the deputy came. It was like time gave up." Lucas felt a strange chill. He didn't believe in signs, but he believed in patterns. And this pattern was screaming. He stood, grabbed his laptop from his bag, and plugged in the USB drive using an adapter he'd always carried for work. The motel Wi-Fi was slow, but the video files loaded. Margaret watched from the bed, fingers pressed to her mouth. Harold stood behind Lucas, rigid. The screen showed the street in grainy nighttime video. Rain falling, porch light off, two figures on the sidewalk, Harold and Margaret. Evan in a hooded jacket, Kendra in a dry coat. Lucas's stomach twisted as he watched his father try to talk, hands raised. He watched Evan shove a folder toward him. He watched Kendra point at the suitcases. He watched Margaret stumble. Then he heard it, Evan's voice clear in the audio. "Sign, Dad, or you sleep outside. I'm not doing this anymore." Harold on the video looked smaller than Lucas had ever seen him. Lucas heard his father's voice. "Evan, please. It's our home." Kendra's voice cut in, sharp. "It's not legally." Lucas's hands shook on the mouse. He watched Evan hand Harold a pen. He watched Harold's hand tremble as he signed something under a porch light that wasn't even on. He watched Kendra nod like she'd just won a business deal. Then he watched the deputy arrive, stand off to the side, and say, "Ma'am, sir, I'm just here to execute the order." Margaret began to sob, silent, shaking. Lucas stopped the video, breathing hard, because the worst part wasn't just seeing his parents in the rain again. It was seeing his father's pride forced into a signature under threat. Lucas turned slowly to face Harold and Margaret. "I'm going to fix this," he said, voice steady, even as his eyes burned. "But I need you to tell me one more thing." Harold swallowed. "What?" Lucas held up the paused video frame where Evan's hand held the folder. "What exactly did you sign?" Lucas asked. "And where did Evan take the original afterward?" By noon, Lucas had 2 legal pads filled with notes, a folder of printed screenshots from the doorbell video, and a migraine pressing behind his eyes. But he didn't slow down. He called a local attorney first. A friend of a friend from high school gave him a number. "She's tough," the guy said. "She doesn't play." The attorney's name was Denise Carter. She met Lucas in her small office above a nail salon, walls lined with framed diplomas and photos of her with judges. She watched the video once, then a second time, her mouth tightening. "This is bad," she said. "Bad for who?" Lucas asked. Denise looked at him. "Bad for the people who did it," she replied. "But it's also complicated." Lucas's stomach dropped. "Explain." Denise pulled out a pen and drew quick boxes on a pad. "An eviction can be legal even if the situation is immoral," she said. "If the paperwork is technically correct, the deputy executes it. They don't investigate family dynamics. They don't check whether your dad was coerced." Lucas felt anger rise. "So they can threaten an old man and just get away with it?" Denise held his gaze. "Not if you can prove coercion or fraud," she said. "And you have evidence. But we have to move fast." "How fast?" Lucas asked. Denise flipped through the copies Lucas had taken from Kendra. "There's a foreclosure process here," she said. "And there's a reverse mortgage. If the reverse mortgage is in default, the lender can push to seize and sell the property. Once it's sold to a third party, it becomes harder to unwind. Not impossible, but harder. Lucas's throat tightened. When is the sale? Denise pointed at a date stamped on a notice. Auction is scheduled in 8 days, she said. 8 days. Lucas felt the pressure like a hand on his throat. Can we stop it? Denise nodded slowly. If we get an emergency injunction, she said. If we show probable fraud. If the judge believes it. If, Lucas repeated. Denise's face softened for a second. Lucas, she said, this town runs on paperwork. We need the originals. We need signatures. We need the bank records. We need the notary log. We need to show how Evan got access. Lucas's mind raced. Where do we start? Denise slid her chair back. County clerk, she said. Then the bank. Then the sheriff's office for the eviction file. We're going to collect everything like we're building a case because we are. Lucas nodded. Let's go. At the county clerk's office, the air smelled like copier toner and old carpet. People sat in plastic chairs holding ticket numbers like they were waiting for medical news. Lucas's impatience made his skin itch. A woman behind the glass window slid a clipboard toward him without looking up. Fill this out, she said flatly. Lucas filled it out. Denise stood beside him, calm, reading the signs on the wall. Fees non-refundable. No legal advice given. Lucas handed the form back. I need copies of any filings related to 212 Maple Ridge, he said. Eviction, mortgage, power of attorney, anything. The clerk glanced at the address and raised an eyebrow. You're the owner? I'm the son, Lucas said. My parents are Harold and Margaret Turner. The clerk's expression tightened like Lucas had asked for a favor. If you're not on the deed, she said, you'll need written authorization. They're elderly, Denise cut in smoothly, and they were illegally evicted. We're gathering records for an emergency injunction. Give us the public filings. The clerk sighed like this was annoying, then typed. Her nails clicked the keyboard. She frowned. Huh? She said. What? Lucas demanded. There's a quitclaim deed filed, she said, eyes narrowing at the screen. 2 months ago. Transfer from Harold Turner to Evan Turner. Lucas felt like he'd been hit. A transfer? Denise leaned closer. Print it, she said. The clerk slid the paper through the slot. Lucas grabbed it, hands shaking. Harold Turner's name. Evan Turner's name. A notarized signature. Lucas stared at the signature. It was his father's name, but it didn't look like his father's hand. Denise's eyes hardened. We need the notary log, she said. We need to know who notarized this. A next stop was the bank branch listed on the reverse mortgage paperwork. The lobby was clean, bright, with holiday decorations that felt offensive in their cheer. Lucas walked to the desk and asked to speak to a manager. A young man with perfect hair and a stiff smile appeared. I'm Brandon, he said. How can I help? Lucas handed him the paperwork. This reverse mortgage, he said. My parents didn't understand it. I need the account history and signatures. Brandon's smile stayed. I'm sorry, he said, but due to privacy laws. Denise stepped forward. We have an ongoing fraud investigation, she said, and we have imminent litigation. We're requesting records through proper channels, but we can confirm basics today. Brandon blinked, uncertain. I can't just... Lucas felt the urge to grab the desk. My parents were put out of their home, he said, voice shaking. They're 79 and 76. Do you understand what that means? Brandon's smile faltered. Sir, I'm just following policy, he said. Policy. That word again? A shield for cruelty. Denise leaned in, her voice calm but sharp. Brandon, she said, we will subpoena everything and name the branch in our filings. Do you want your name attached to a case involving elder financial abuse? Brandon swallowed. His eyes darted to a supervisor behind him. Let me check, he said quickly, and disappeared into a back office. Lucas stood there, chest rising and falling, watching a family with kids open a new account at another desk, laughing like the world was safe. He wanted to scream. He wanted to grab someone and say, Do you have any idea what people can do to old folks when nobody's watching? Denise touched Lucas's arm. Breathe, she murmured. We need your brain, not your rage. Brandon returned with an older woman in a blazer. She introduced herself as the branch manager, Linda. She looked at Lucas like she'd seen versions of this story before. "We can't give you everything today," Linda said, "but we can confirm the reverse mortgage was opened and that it is in default due to missed conditions." "What conditions?" Lucas demanded. Linda glanced at Denise. "The borrower must occupy the home as a primary residence," she said. "According to records, the borrowers moved out." Lucas's blood ran cold. "Moved out?" he repeated. Linda nodded. "An occupancy certification was submitted," she said. "Signed." Lucas's heart pounded. "Signed by who?" Linda hesitated, then slid a paper across the desk. "By Harold Turner," she said. "Digitally." Lucas stared at the paper. It showed a digital signature, a timestamp, and an IP address. The IP address was local. The timestamp was 2 days after Harold's hospital discharge. Lucas looked up slowly. "My father was recovering from a stroke," he said. "He doesn't even own a computer." Linda's eyes tightened with concern, but her voice stayed professional. "If you believe it's fraud," she said, "you'll need to file a report." Denise nodded. "We will," she said, "and we'll be requesting the full device logs and any acknowledgments tied to this account." Lucas took the paper carefully, like it was a weapon. Because it was. As they left the bank, Lucas's phone buzzed with a new notification. A calendar invite. From Kendra. Subject line, "Property showing, confirmed." Lucas's blood ran cold, because it meant they weren't waiting for the auction. They were already trying to sell the house, and Lucas had 8 days. But he didn't know if he even had that. That evening, Lucas sat in the motel room with his laptop open. Documents spread across the bed like an ugly puzzle. Harold and Margaret slept in short, restless stretches. Lucas watched their breathing and felt a simple, frightening thought. If he'd waited 1 more week, 1 more month, he might have come home to a funeral. Denise called late. "We need something that makes a judge feel it," she said. "A proof that isn't just your word against theirs." Lucas looked at the quitclaim deed copy again. The notary stamp with Sandra Lopez's name and commission number. "Kendra's office," Lucas said. They met in the parking lot and drove to the strip mall where Lopez Realty sat between a tanning salon and a tax prep place. The lobby smelled like air freshener and ambition. A receptionist looked up, smile fading when Denise placed the deed on the counter. "We're here for Sandra Lopez," Denise said. "It's about her notary journal and a deed transfer for 212 Maple Ridge." The receptionist disappeared into the back, and moments later Sandra stepped out. She was polished, bright lipstick, perfect hair, but her eyes tightened when she saw Denise's face. "Denise," Sandra said, forcing cheer. "What's going on?" Denise didn't waste time. "Harold Turner wasn't present when this was notarized," she said. "And you stamped it anyway." Sandra's smile froze. "I don't remember every signing," she snapped. "Then show us the journal entry," Denise replied, calm and relentless. Sandra's shoulders stiffened. "That's confidential." "It's subpoena-able," Denise said. "Show it willingly or show it to a judge." Lucas stepped forward, keeping his voice steady. "My father had a stroke," he said. "He can barely hold a pen. If you helped take his house, you need to tell the truth." Sandra swallowed hard, then turned and walked them into her office. On her desk sat the thick notary journal. Her fingers trembled as she flipped pages and stopped on an entry. Lucas leaned in. Harold Turner. Quitclaim deed. Date and time. Then Lucas saw what wasn't there. The thumbprint line was blank. Denise pointed, voice low. "Where's the thumbprint?" Sandra's face went pale. "Sometimes people refuse," she whispered. Denise didn't blink. "What ID did you verify?" "Driver's license," Sandra said automatically. Denise's voice sharpened. "Harold Turner hasn't driven in years. His license expired." Sandra's breath hitched. Her eyes filled, and the polished mask cracked. "I didn't see him," she admitted, barely audible. "Evan said Harold was embarrassed. Kendra said he was fragile. They said he'd sign at home and Evan would bring the paperwork back with the ID copy. They said it was allowed." Denise's eyes hardened. "It's not allowed," she said. "You know that." Sandra wiped at her cheek. "Kendra said it was urgent. she whispered. She said the bank would take the house. She said she was saving them. Saving them. Lucas felt sick at how that lie kept showing up in new clothes. Denise asked, "Do you have anything in writing?" Sandra opened her email and pulled up a thread from Kendra. "Harold will sign at home. Don't stress him with extra steps. He's fragile. Then, we lose everything if this doesn't get filed." Denise photographed the screen and the journal entry, including the missing thumbprint. Sandra pulled out the ID copy Evan had provided. Harold's expired license. "I'll give a statement," Sandra whispered. "Just don't let her come after me." Denise's voice softened a fraction. "Tell the truth and you'll be protected," she said. "Keep lying and you'll be a partner in it." Sandra nodded, shaking. Before leaving the strip mall, Denise made Sandra print the email thread and sign a short affidavit on the spot. Sandra's hand shook so much her signature looked like a storm cloud. Denise didn't stop there. "Who else helped?" she asked. Sandra hesitated. "There was a locksmith," she admitted. "Kendra called him. She paid cash and made him sign a discretion form. She said the clients were confused and didn't need to be involved." Lucas's stomach tightened. "What's his name?" Sandra gave it, and Denise wrote it down. On the way out, Lucas noticed a stack of blank consent-to-sell forms on a printer tray, already pre-filled with Harold and Margaret's names at the top. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a glimpse into how routine this was for Kendra, how many signatures she expected to harvest like crops. Denise and Lucas drove straight to the locksmith's listed address. The man who answered the door was in his 60s, gray beard, wary eyes. When Denise introduced herself and mentioned 212 Maple Ridge, his face tightened. "I didn't want trouble," he said quickly. "They told me it was all legal." Denise held up the doorbell video, still frame of Evan and Kendra on the porch. "Did you change these locks?" she asked. The locksmith stared at the image, then nodded, defeated. "Yes," he admitted. "Kendra paid me. She told me the owners had moved out. I asked for proof. She showed me papers and said her husband was power of attorney." Lucas kept his voice calm. "Did you ever speak to my parents?" he asked. The man shook his head. "No," he said. "They weren't there. And looking back, that should have been my clue." Denise asked for the invoice. The locksmith hesitated, then went inside and returned with a carbon copy receipt. Kendra's signature was on the payment line. Next to it, written in pen, "Owner not present." Denise photographed it, then asked for a statement. The locksmith sighed and nodded. "I'll tell the truth," he said. "I don't want this on my conscience." Back in the car, Lucas stared at the receipt, hands tight on the paper. It was another brick in the wall of proof. Emails, journal, missing thumbprint, expired ID, invoice, video, digital logs. Piece by piece, the story stopped being a family argument. It became a case. As they stepped out of Sandra's office, the hallway door opened and Kendra appeared, heels clicking, eyes already sharp. Her smile was thin, not friendly. "Well," Kendra said, "look at you two." Lucas held her gaze. "We're done with the games," he said. Kendra's eyes flicked to Sandra. "You're talking," she said, voice low. Sandra flinched but didn't look away. "I'm telling the truth," she whispered. Kendra's face tightened. "Lucas," she said, turning her cold focus on him, "you think you understand this because you watched one rainy night? You left. Evan stayed. He carried everything while you played success." Lucas kept his voice calm. "Evan didn't carry," he said. "He took." Kendra's jaw clenched. "Your parents were going to lose that house," she snapped. "We just moved the pieces before it got ugly." "It was ugly," Lucas replied. "You made it ugly." For a beat, Kendra looked like she might lunge. Then she leaned in, voice sharp as glass. "If you keep pushing," she whispered, "you're going to break your own life. Your world doesn't like scandals." Lucas didn't blink. "Then let it see the truth," he said. Kendra's eyes flashed, surprise, then fury. She straightened, turned, and walked out. The bell at the front door jingling behind her like a warning. Lucas and Denise stood in the quiet office for a moment, the weight of what they'd just gained settling in. They had it now. A notary admitting fraud. emails instructing her to skip steps, an expired ID used like a weapon, real proof. And Lucas knew that once Evan and Kendra realized the proof existed, they wouldn't get calmer. They would get desperate. And desperate people don't stop when they're losing. They lash out. The next morning, Denise filed the emergency injunction request before the courthouse even opened, armed with the doorbell video, the notary journal photos, and Sandra Lopez's sworn statement. Lucas sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, feeling like his whole life had shrunk down to paper and waiting. Harold and Margaret stayed at the motel, resting. Lucas wanted them safe. He didn't want them dragged into another humiliating room with strangers staring. But when Harold heard where Lucas was going, he had sat up in bed and said, "No." Lucas had turned surprised. "Dad, you should rest." Harold's eyes were steady, stubborn. "I'm not hiding," he said. "They hid me. I'm done hiding." Margaret had reached for Harold's arm. "Harold." Harold squeezed her hand. "We're going," he repeated. "We're not going to let them speak for us anymore." So they came. Harold wore his best jacket, the one Margaret used to brush lint off before church. Margaret wore a scarf and carried the framed photo under her arm like a shield. They moved slowly, but they moved together. When they entered the courthouse, people looked. Lucas felt anger rise, but Harold lifted his chin. "This is our town," Harold murmured. "We belong here." Lucas swallowed. He realized his father wasn't just fighting for a house. He was fighting for his place in the world. They waited. Then Evan arrived. He walked in wearing a clean button-down and a tight smile, as if he was attending a work meeting. Kendra walked beside him, heels clicking, eyes scanning the room. When she saw Harold and Margaret, she didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed. Evan's smile faded. "Mom," he said, voice too loud. "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be out." Margaret flinched. Harold didn't. "We shouldn't be out," Harold repeated, voice calm. "Funny. You said the same thing when you changed my locks." A few heads turned. Evan's face tightened. "Dad," he said, lowering his voice. "Not here." Lucas stood between them. "Here is exactly where," Lucas said evenly. Kendra's eyes snapped to Lucas. "This is harassment," she hissed. Denise stepped forward, calm as a blade. "It's a hearing," she said. "You'll have your turn." They were called into the courtroom. It was smaller than Lucas expected. Fluorescent lights, a judge's bench, flags, the quiet seriousness of a place where decisions become real. The judge, a woman with tired eyes and sharp focus, listened as Denise explained the situation. Denise didn't perform. She laid out facts. The eviction filed by Evan, the reverse mortgage, the quitclaim deed, the notary irregularities, the doorbell video. Then Denise played the clip. "Sign, Dad, or you sleep outside." The audio filled the courtroom. It was louder in that room than it had been on a laptop screen. In here it sounded like what it was: cruelty. Harold's jaw clenched. Margaret stared at the floor, tears slipping. Evan's face went pale. Kendra's mouth tightened, but she kept her chin up. The judge paused the video and looked at Evan. "Mr. Turner," she said, voice steady, "did you threaten your father to obtain his signature?" Evan swallowed. "Your Honor," he began, voice shaky. "My parents have been declining. They needed help. They refused. I did what I had to do." The judge's eyes narrowed. "That doesn't answer my question." Evan glanced at Kendra. Kendra stared forward, expression hard. Evan's voice rose slightly, defensive. "He was being unreasonable," he said. "He wouldn't sign. He wouldn't listen. And we were drowning. We had debt. We had bills. We had—" "We?" the judge interrupted. Evan hesitated. Kendra's voice cut in, smooth. "Your Honor, with respect, Lucas Turner abandoned them," she said. "He left. He built a life somewhere else. Evan stayed and carried the burden. They asked for help. They wanted to downsize. They were embarrassed. They didn't want Lucas to see them struggling." Lucas felt a flash of rage, but he kept his face calm. He'd promised himself he wouldn't turn this into a shouting match. Denise stood. "Your Honor," she said, "we have a sworn statement from the notary who admits Harold Turner was not present when the deed transfer was notarized." Kendra's head snapped toward Denise. "That's a lie," she hissed. Denise handed the statement to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge read it in silence. Her expression didn't change, but Lucas saw something hard settle in her eyes. She looked up at Sandra Lopez, who sat behind Denise, trembling. "Ms. Lopez," the judge said, "is this your statement?" Sandra nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge turned back to Evan and Kendra. "Then we have a problem," she said. Kendra's voice rose, losing polish. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "They were going to lose the house anyway. We were trying to save them." The judge raised a hand. "Enough," she said. Silence fell. Then the judge looked at Harold and Margaret. "Mr. and Mrs. Turner," she said gently, "did you intend to transfer your home to your son Evan?" Margaret's fingers tightened on the framed photo. Harold spoke, voice steady. "No," Harold said. "I intended to keep my home." The judge nodded slowly. "Did you understand the reverse mortgage paperwork?" Harold's throat worked. "No," he admitted. "They said it was a loan to help with repairs. They said Lucas sent it. They said it was normal now." The judge's gaze flicked to Lucas, then back to Evan. "Did you tell your parents this was from Lucas?" she asked. Evan's face reddened. "I didn't," he started. Harold's voice cut in, calm but painful. "You did," Harold said. "You said Lucas wanted it. You said Lucas didn't have time to deal with us. You said Lucas was tired of our problems." Lucas's chest tightened. He looked at Evan and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Fear. Not fear of jail. Fear of being seen. Because Evan's whole story depended on being the good son, the responsible one. The one who stayed. The one who sacrificed. Now, under fluorescent lights, his parents were telling the truth. And the truth didn't match his story. The judge set the papers down. "Based on the evidence presented," she said, "I'm issuing a temporary injunction to halt any sale, auction, or transfer of the property at 2-12 Maple Ridge, pending further investigation." Lucas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. But the judge wasn't done. She looked at Evan. "Mr. Turner, you filed an eviction against your own parents," she said. "You will not enter that property or contact them without counsel present. Do you understand?" Evan's lips parted. "Your Honor, do you understand?" the judge repeated. Evan swallowed. "Yes," he whispered. Kendra's face twisted with anger. She leaned toward Evan and hissed something Lucas couldn't hear. Then she looked at Lucas, eyes blazing, and said softly, "You think you've won." Lucas held her stare. "I think my parents will sleep in a bed tonight," he said. "That's what I think." Kendra's smile was sharp. "You're going to regret making this public," she whispered. "People in your world don't like mess." Lucas felt that hit because she wasn't wrong. His investors, his board, his brand, everything depended on control. Kendra leaned in closer, voice like ice. "I know things," she said, "about your company, about your contracts, about what happens if this story gets out. You're not the only one with leverage." Lucas stared at her for a moment, then looked at his parents. Margaret's eyes were on him, full of fear and love. Harold's chin was lifted, but his hands trembled. Lucas realized something in that second. His image had never hugged him when he was scared. His money had never held his mother's hand. His reputation had never sat with his father at a kitchen table in the dark. Lucas turned back to Kendra. "Then let it get messy," he said quietly. Kendra blinked, surprised. Lucas's voice stayed even. "If my success requires me to stay silent while you hurt my parents," he said, "then it isn't success. It's a costume." Evan flinched at that word, like it pierced him too. The judge dismissed the hearing for the day, ordering a full investigation into the financial transactions and the notary misconduct. As they filed out, reporters weren't there yet, but eyes were. People whispered. People stared. Evan walked past Harold, not looking at him. Harold spoke, voice low. "Evan?" he said. Evan stopped, shoulders rigid. Harold didn't shout. He didn't beg. He just said the one sentence that sounded like a verdict. "I taught you better than this." Evan's breath hitched. For a second his face crumpled like he might say something real. Then Kendra grabbed his arm and pulled him forward. Don't! She snapped. He's manipulating you! Evan kept walking. Lucas watched them go, feeling both victory and sorrow twist together. Because justice wasn't clean. It never was. It was bruised. It was late. It was complicated. As they reached the courthouse steps, Denise leaned toward Lucas. "This is a strong start," she murmured. "But don't relax. People like Kendra don't just walk away." Lucas nodded, eyes on the street, because he knew the next fight wouldn't be in a courtroom. It would be in whatever Kendra and Evan did when they had nothing left to lose. For the next 48 hours, Lucas ran on coffee and fear. Denise moved like a machine, filing motions, calling banks, pulling records. Harold and Margaret stayed at the motel, and Lucas hated every minute of it. But he refused to risk them being alone while Evan and Kendra were desperate. On the third day, Denise called with a voice that sounded different, tighter, sharper. "We got the bank logs," she said. The digital signatures were submitted from a device registered to Kendra's email, same IP address as her office. Lucas felt his stomach turn. "So it's traceable." "It's traceable," Denise confirmed. "And we have a storage unit contract in Kendra's name. Your parents' belongings are there." They drove straight to the storage facility. The manager, Rick, rolled up a metal door, and the smell of dust rushed out. Boxes were stacked like someone had packed a life away in a hurry. Margaret stepped inside and went still when she saw the bin labeled "recipes" in her own handwriting. "They took this," she whispered, voice shaking, and Lucas realized again how small cruelty can look from the outside, and how huge it feels when it's yours. Harold found his toolbox and rested a hand on it like he was touching a friend. "They didn't just want the house," he murmured. "They wanted to put us away." Denise photographed everything and had Rick sign a statement. "We'll inventory and retrieve it legally," she said. "But this shows wrongful removal." As they were leaving, Denise's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her face drained. "It's the hospital," she said. The social worker's voice came through, careful and concerned. "We received a guardianship request for Mr. Harold Turner and a recommendation for assisted living placement," she explained. "It lists Evan Turner as guardian. The physician's signature appears inconsistent. I'm calling because it doesn't feel right." Lucas felt cold spread through his chest. Evan and Kendra had lost the house, so now they were trying to take the person. Denise stayed calm. "Do not process anything without a court order and direct evaluation," she said. "This is part of an elder abuse investigation." When the call ended, Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth. "They're trying to take him," she whispered. Harold's eyes were steady, but his hands trembled. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone. Denise escalated everything to the county prosecutor with the full stack of evidence: the doorbell video, the fraudulent deed, the notary admission and emails, the bank device logs, the storage unit contract, and now the attempted guardianship paperwork. The prosecutor didn't posture. He just nodded once and said, "This is enough for charges." Harold stared at the floor. "I don't want to destroy my own son," he whispered. Lucas sat beside him. "Dad," he said gently, "this isn't revenge. This is stopping it, so you can live without fear." 2 days later, deputies served warrants at Kendra's office and pulled computers, files, and the notary journal. The bank froze the questionable accounts. Adult Protective Services opened a formal case. The prosecutor filed charges for elder financial exploitation, forgery, and coercion. Evan was arrested at work. Kendra was arrested after she tried to leave town with a suitcase that wasn't hers. When Lucas heard the word arrested, he didn't feel triumph. He felt grief, because the people who hurt you are still people you once loved, and that makes justice heavy. With the investigation underway, the court reversed the eviction and granted Harold and Margaret immediate access to their home with a police escort. The day they returned to Maple Ridge, the sky was clear, but the air was cold. Margaret paused at the bottom step like she didn't trust her own legs. "Go on," Lucas whispered. She climbed slowly, fingers brushing the porch railing like she was relearning it. Harold stood at the door, hand hovering over the knob, eyes wet. "If I walk in," he said, voice low, "I don't want to be afraid anymore." "You won't be," Lucas promised. Inside, the house looked stripped. Missing photos, missing warmth, but it was still theirs. Lucas brought boxes back from the storage unit and started putting the life back where it belonged. He hung the family photos. He placed the quilt on the couch. He set Margaret's recipe box on the counter like a crown. Harold walked straight to the porch light switch and flipped it on. The warm glow spilled onto the steps. "There," Harold whispered, and for the first time Lucas saw his father's shoulders drop. Lucas didn't fly back to Texas. He told his company the truth. He stepped away from meetings and leaned into what mattered: doctor appointments, medication schedules, repairs, and quiet mornings at the kitchen table. He sat and listened when his parents spoke, and he didn't rush the silence when they couldn't. One night, Lucas finally said the words he'd been avoiding. "I'm sorry I believed you were fine," he told them. "I'm sorry I let anyone speak for me. I'm sorry I wasn't here." Harold looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You're here now," he said. "Keep your word." So Lucas did more than fix a house. He built something for other families too. With Pastor Reed and local legal aid, Lucas funded a small program at the community center where seniors could bring paperwork and get free help understanding it. Deeds, bank forms, nursing home contracts, anything. A hotline, a real person. A place that didn't call them burdens. They named it the Porchlight Project because no one should be pushed into darkness just because they're old. Weeks later, on a rainy evening that looked a lot like the night Lucas arrived, Margaret set the table for 3. Soup simmered on the stove, the real kind, onions and celery, and patience. The smell filled the house like a memory returning. Outside, the rain tapped the windows. The porch light glowed warm. Harold's watch ticked again after Lucas had it repaired, steady as a heartbeat. Margaret placed the framed graduation photo on the mantel, centered, where it belonged. Then she looked at Lucas and smiled, small but real. "You're home," she said. Lucas swallowed. "I am," he answered. "And if you've ever had someone you love suffer in silence, tell me in the comments what you wish you could say to them today. And if you want more stories like this, stories that remind us who deserves respect, subscribe, because the next one will hit even deeper." The rain kept falling outside, but inside the lights stayed on.